Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for Minecraft Java Edition 1.17, the Caves and Cliffs Update Part 1. If you're part of the notification gang, then you might be seeing this video even before the release is out. Anyway, the release date is today. Now, before we dive into the meat of the changes, let's talk about that Part 1 part of the title. The Caves and Cliffs update has been split into two parts. That means almost all of the terrain changes, the world generation changes, are in Part 2 and will be released later this year for the holiday season. If you want to play a preview of that, there's also a data pack, the Caves and Cliffs Preview Pack, that has a bunch more changes that will not be in this video. Instead, there will be a separate video out about that one. In this video, we're going to go through the 3 new mobs, the goats, axolotls, and glow squids. We're going to go through all the new blocks and items, of which there are more than 100 in this version. Of course, there are also other changes to gameplay that we'll be detailing, including some bug fixes for the most high-profile bugs, but definitely not all of the bug fixes, because there is a huge amount of them. We'll also be covering all the new advancements and changes to visuals, user interface, and sounds. The video is split into sections, so you can click on the timeline to go to a certain section, otherwise you'll find the timestamps in the video description. But that's enough rambling, let's go with goats. The goat is a new passive mob with 10 hit points, that is 5 hearts of health. Goats spawn in mountains in groups of 2 to 3, with a 5% chance of one being a baby. There's also a 2% chance of one being a screaming goat, which is a unique variant of the goat, with the same visuals but a decidedly different sound. Goats have some unique behaviors in that they will sometimes make a huge leap. That's a random behavior and not part of trying to get to a certain location, and it also has a cooldown, so it will only happen once in a while. Because they like to make these huge leaps, they also have a natural 5 heart or 10 hit point resistance to fall damage. Another unique behavior is that goats will randomly decide to ram something that moves, or also an armor stand. It will line itself up and then charge, giving a huge knockback to the target. This is only a knockback, and mobs do not retaliate after being hit. This is a very long cooldown, so it doesn't happen too often, but screaming goats do it way more often. Another unique thing with goats is that they will avoid powder snow when walking around. We'll get back to powder snow later on in the video. Goats can be tempted using wheat and will also breed when fed wheat. When bred, there's a 2% chance for the child to become a screaming goat. And finally, goats are a new source of milk. You can milk them using a bucket. Killing an adult goat gives experience, but no loot drops. Our next new mob is the cutest murderer out there, it's the axolotl. It's a new neutral mob with 14 hit points or 7 hearts of health. Axolotls spawn in groups of 1 to 4 in underground lakes and pools. In specific, this means that they spawn in any water that is completely dark, not visible from the sky, and in water that has only water sources at most 5 blocks above one of the naturally generating stone types, that is stone, granite, andesite, diorite, tuff, or deepslate. Axolotls belong to an entirely new mob camp called Underground Water Creatures. There are 4 common variants of them. They are pink, called Lucy, brown, called Wild, gold, and cyan. For any spawn, there's an equal chance of getting all of these variants. There's also one rare variant that you have a 1 in 1,200 chance of seeing. That is the blue axolotl. Axolotls are amphibious creatures that can move both on land and in water. However, they are much slower on land. They do not like it out of water and will begin to dry up and start taking damage if they are out of water for longer than 5 minutes. And while on land, axolotls will try to make it towards any nearby water source. If you really need to have your axolotl out of water longer than that, then throwing a splash water bottle on them will give it a 1.5 minute of moisturization. An axolotl will also be moisturized by rain. Leading them over land is not the most efficient way of getting your axolotl around. You can also pick up an axolotl in a water bucket to carry it around. As with fish, this makes the axolotl persistent when placed back into the world. Axolotls can be tempted and bred. You use this using buckets of tropical fish. When bred like this, the baby has a 1 in 1,200 chance of being the rare blue axolotl. Otherwise, it will inherit the color of a random parent. The baby is also automatically persistent and will not despawn. Otherwise, if you're holding a bucket of tropical fish, they will swim around with you. They will always attack drowned, guardians and elder guardians, and they will also chase after squids and other types of fish. but they have a 2-minute cooldown after attacking one of them. If you kill a target that an axolotl was attacking or that had attacked that axolotl, then the axolotl will grant you a temporary regeneration and remove any mining fatigue effect. The regeneration effect stacks in duration depending on the number of axolotls targeting the enemy you killed, up to a maximum of 2 minutes. Sometimes when an axolotl takes damage while in the water, it will play dead, so that it stops being attacked. While an axolotl plays dead, other mobs will ignore the axolotl, and playing dead has a random chance of 1/3 to heal 2 hearts, that is 4 hit points of health, to the axolotl. Killing an adult axolotl gives experience, but no loot drops. Our last new mob in this version is the Glow Squid. The Glow Squid is a new passive mob with 10 hit points or 5 hearts of health. They spawn in groups of 2 to 4 in underwater lakes and pools, in fact with exactly the same spawn requirements as for axolotls, and they also belong to the same new mob cap, underground water creatures. Glow squids are self-illuminated and can be seen from even very far distances, otherwise they work very much like a squid, including all of the derpiness of the squid AI. If you kill a glow squid, it will drop 1 to 3 glow ink sacs, or more of them if you're holding a looting weapon. So with that, let's move on to our new blocks and items and the glow ink. The glow ink sacs can be used on a sign to make the text super visible even at night. It makes the text glow. Works with colors as well. If you dislike the effect, you can use a regular ink sac on the sign to remove the glow effect. Another option is to craft the glow ink sac with an item frame to create a glow item frame. This is an item frame that is self-illuminated just like the squid and will be perfectly visible even at night. Now let's turn our attention down into the caves and start with ores. All of the ore types without the unique shapes have been given new textures for accessibility reasons. That means that each ore is now distinguishable by shape alone. You don't need to be able to distinguish colors. But there are more changes to ores. Ores that are smeltable now drop raw item forms instead of the ore block. This goes for iron and gold, but also the new copper, so you get raw iron, raw gold, and raw copper. This means that fortune now works with all ore types, and if you want the original ore blocks, then you can mine it with silk touch. And such blocks will also remain smeltable. Those new raw ore items can be crafted 3x3 into a new block type as well. This is a storage block like any other, can be uncrafted into the ores themselves again, but of course can also be used as decoration. Let's continue with the ores and talk about the new one, copper. Copper ores can be found in blobs across the overworld, similar to iron and coal, but the distribution of ore is different. It ranges from level 0 at the bottom of the world to level 98. However, this is a triangular distribution. What the heck does that mean? Well, it means that the frequency of finding such ore is highest at the center of the distribution, at height 48. So that's where you want to be to optimally find as much copper as possible. When you mine a copper ore, it will drop 2 to 3 raw copper, and like we mentioned in the previous section, you can get more of them if you mine with fortune. Smelt those to get a copper ingot, and craft 9 copper ingots in 3x3 to get a copper block. That copper block can then be uncrafted into 9 copper ingots again should you so wish, but you could also craft 2x2 copper blocks or put them into a stone cutter to get cut copper, and that crafts or cuts into cut copper stairs and cut copper slabs. All of these types of copper blocks have a unique mechanic. They will oxidize over time based off of random ticking, just like grass spreading or leaves decaying. The stages of copper oxidization are called copper, exposed copper, weathered copper, and oxidized copper, that is in sequence from least to most oxidized. As a copper block oxidizes, it will turn more and more green. Copper oxidization is also based on a block's surroundings. If there are more copper blocks in the immediate area around a copper block, then it will take longer for that copper to oxidize. So if you want it to oxidize quicker, spread your blocks out. Regardless of the stage of oxidization, you can always keep crafting or cutting with the copper to create these shaped blocks. If you don't want a copper block to oxidize any further, then you can wax it. This is done by right-clicking with a honeycomb or by crafting the block with a honeycomb item. You can change your mind about this also by scraping the block with an axe. You do that by right-clicking with the axe just as if you would strip the bark off a tree. You can also scrape off the oxidization itself to move a block one step earlier in the oxidization process by right-clicking with an axe. Another way that copper will be cleaned of its oxidization is if it is struck by lightning. A lightning striking near copper will clean a somewhat random patch of copper. Waxing the blocks will prevent this effect as well. A related new block is the lightning rod that is crafted from 3 copper ingots. The lightning rod can be placed in any direction just like end rods, and it places exactly the same way as end rods do. A lightning rod will attract any lightning that is about to strike in a circular area of a radius of 128 blocks around it. That lightning will instead strike the lightning rod and will have approximately the same effects on the lightning rod as it would have in the original strike location, so it can set your area on fire, for instance. So be a bit careful where you place your lightning rods. One thing that will not happen, however, is it will not spawn skeleton traps. If you want to, you can also waterlog a lightning rod. Keep in mind that in order to be struck by lightning, a lightning rod needs an absolutely clear view of the sky. When a lightning rod is struck by lightning, it will flash and it will give off a redstone signal. Let's move on to the new amethysts. Amethyst geodes spawn underground in connection to caves. An amethyst geode has 3 layers. From the outside in, the layers are smooth basalt, a new stone type, calcite, another new stone type, and then amethyst blocks. These amethyst blocks come in 2 forms. One is the regular blocks of amethyst, the other is budding amethysts. Budding amethysts are blocks where the crystal shards will grow. One thing to keep in mind with these blocks is that you cannot move them in any way. They cannot be pushed by pistons, and they can also not be mined. If you mine it, it will simply vanish. On any side of a budding amethyst block where there is air or a water source block, a small amethyst bud can grow. That bud will then eventually grow in 3 stages until they become amethyst clusters. These fully grown amethyst clusters can then be mined with an iron pickaxe or better to drop 4 amethyst shards and 2 crystal shards if you break them with your hand or with a piston. It is also possible to pick up the amethyst buds. You can use Silk Touch to pick them up at any stage. However, note that they will not grow unless they are placed on a budding amethyst. 4 amethyst shards can then be crafted back into amethyst blocks. There are other use cases as well for the amethyst shards, however. One is the Spyglass. It is crafted from 2 copper ingots and 1 amethyst shard. The Spyglass is a new tool. It is used to simply zoom in. You will get a look at a faraway location when you hold it in your hand and use it in first-person mode. Another use for the amethyst shards is to craft it into tinted glass. That is done by crafting a glass block with 4 amethyst shards. That gives you 2 tinted glass blocks. Tinted glass is a new type of glass that does not let light through. This means that you can now create dark areas that you can still see into. In other aspects, tinted glass works mostly like glass, but one interesting difference is that tinted glass can be obtained without Silk Touch. It does not shatter. Let's talk about Dripstone. Dripstone are 2 new types of blocks and items. They are Dripstone blocks, a full block, and pointed Dripstone, which when placed create stalagmites and stalactites. Pointed Dripstone does not need a specific tool to be mined, however, the Dripstone blocks can only be mined with a pickaxe. If you want the Dripstone blocks but you only have pointed Dripstone, then you can craft 2x2 pointed Dripstone into a Dripstone block. If you place a pointed Dripstone on a ceiling, it will become a stalactite, and if you place it on a floor, it will become a stalagmite. You can build longer stalactites and stalagmites by placing more pointed Dripstone blocks on top of each other. If you build them all the way so that they connect to each other, then the tips will merge, unless you're holding shift when you place the last pointed Dripstone. If you break the block that a stalagmite is on, then it will break. Pointed Dripstone is, well, pointed. It will hurt if you fall on top of it, but it will also hurt if it falls on your head. Stalactites will fall down if they are not attached to something above, so if you break the block or move the block that they are on, then the whole column will fall. Another way of breaking a pointed Dripstone is to throw a trident on it. That will cause the part of the stalactite under where you hit to fall. This will both hurt you, but also take extra durability on your helmet. If you die this way, there's a new death message. It is player name was skewered by a falling stalactite. Or if you were somehow involved with combat, player name was skewered by a falling stalactite whilst fighting, and the entity name you were fighting. The same goes if you fall down onto a stalagmite. This hurts you more than normal fall damage does. There's a new death message for this as well. If you're killed by falling onto a stalagmite, it will say player name was impaled on a stalagmite. Or if you were in combat when it happened, player name was impaled on a stalagmite whilst fighting, and the entity name. Dripstone is, as the name might imply, related to dripping. In real life, stalagmites and stalactites are formed by dripping water, and this is no different in the game. If you have a stalactite hanging from a dripstone block with a water source above it, and the floor or a stalagmite within 10 blocks below it, then the dripstone can grow. This is a very slow process, but eventually the stalactite will grow up to 7 blocks long. A stalagmite below might also form and grow from this process. Dripstone has another dripping related feature though. Water dripping from a stalactite can be collected using a cauldron. This is another new way of obtaining a water source. However, if there is a lava source above the block that the stalactite is hanging from, then it will instead drop lava. And this will drip into and gather in a cauldron as well, causing the cauldron to fill with lava. You can then take out a bucket of lava from that cauldron. To get dripstone, you can either find it in a cluster generated in a cave. They are pretty rare though. You can also buy 2-pointed dripstone from a wandering trader for the price of 1 emerald, and there's a new trade for dripstone blocks from a journeyman level mason villager. However, note that this needs to be a newly unlocked mason after this update. Let's move on to another new type of stone, the Deepslate. Deepslate is a new family of stones with lots of different variants. It is found deep in the world and spawns in blobs with their center between levels 0 and 16. It is tougher to mine than stone. In fact, one important aspect of it is not insta-mineable even with the highest level of all the involved tools and effects. When you mine it without silk touch, then you get cobbled Deepslate, and that can then be smelted back into Deepslate itself. Cobbled Deepslate looks the same on all sides, however the normal Deepslate has a different top texture. That also means that it places in a directional manner, so you place it much like you would place a log or a bone block. Cobbled Deepslate is a slightly harder block still. It takes a little longer to mine than Deepslate, just like cobblestone takes longer to mine than stone. And cobbled Deepslate is also a crafting material. Just like blackstone or cobblestone, it can be used to craft stone tools and furnaces. There are many variant blocks of Deepslate. We talked about Deepslate and Cobbled Deepslate. Cobbled Deepslate also has stairs, slabs, and walls that you can make either by crafting or by stone cutting. You can also craft or stone cut it into Polished Deepslate, that is a 2x2 craft. Polished Deepslate also has stairs, slabs, and walls, and can be further crafted 2x2 or stone cut into Deepslate bricks. Deepslate bricks also has stairs, slabs, and walls, but in addition to this also has a cracked version. You get that by smelting it. But wait, there's more. You can craft this one 2x2 as well, or stone cut it into Deepslate tiles. That also in turn has stairs, slabs, and walls, and also another cracked version that you can get by smelting it. There's one final crafted item here. It is chiseled Deepslate that is crafted from 2 cobbled Deepslate slabs on top of each other, or can be cut in a stone cutter. But it doesn't really end there. There are Deepslate versions of all the ores. If an ore block tries to generate into a place where there's already a Deepslate block, then it will, instead of the normal ore, generate a Deepslate version of that ore. Those are twice as tough to mine as their stone counterparts, and they work exactly the same. If you mine it without Silk Touch, then you get the raw items. If you mine it with Silk Touch, you get the Deepslate ore variants. Note that these are way more rare than the normal ores. Finally, Deepslate can also be infested by silverfish. There's no way to obtain these blocks in survival. However, if you really want them in your survival worlds, of course you can place a Deepslate, not a cobbled Deepslate, but a Deepslate, and then lure a silverfish into it. This is not an easy feat. Let's stay underground for a little bit longer for the other new stone types. We already mentioned smooth basalt as part of the Amethyst geodes. However, that's not the only way to get it. You can also smelt regular basalt to get smooth basalt. We also mentioned calcite. It's another new block found in the Amethyst geodes and only found in the Amethyst geodes. And the final stone type for today is tuff. Tuff generates very similarly to Deepslate. Blobs of tuff can be found with their center at heights between 0 and 16. Let's move above ground and talk about the Snowier Snow. It is a new block called Powder Snow. Powder Snow is a trap block that causes any entity that walks into it to sink in and start freezing. You cannot pick up the block itself, but you can pick up and place powder snow using a bucket. This also works for dispensers. Powder snow can also be pushed and pulled with pistons. If you want powder snow, it does not generate in the world yet. However, you can get it by leaving a cauldron outside in a location where precipitation is snow, and it will fill with powder snow when it is snowing. When the cauldron is full, you can then take out the powder snow using a bucket. A quirk to keep in mind here is that if a burning entity enters the cauldron, then it will be extinguished and the snow will melt to water. Some mobs are naturally light and do not sink into powder snow. They are foxes, rabbits, endermites, and silverfish. If you want to emulate them, you can wear leather boots that will allow you to also walk on top of powder snow without sinking in. Otherwise, you or a mob will sink in and you will start to freeze. It takes 7 seconds to freeze entirely, and then you will start to take freezing damage. When this happens, your screen will have an overlay and your hearts will turn a frozen blue. Once started, this will deal freezing damage every 2 seconds to the frozen entity. Of course, if you die this way, then there are new death messages as well. It will be player name froze to death, or if you're in combat, then player name was frozen to death by the entity you were fighting. Snow golems, polar bears, strays, and withers are immune to freezing damage. And on the flip side, magma cubes, blazes, and striders take additional damage from freezing. Note that any mobs that can be hurt by freezing damage will not spawn into powder snow. There is, however, a way to stay warm. Wearing any piece of leather armor will prevent you from freezing entirely. If any entity on fire comes in contact with powder snow, then it will put out the fire and the powder snow will melt. One final thing with the powder snow, any skeleton stuck in powder snow will convert to a stray. Let's talk about the lush blocks in this version. These are the blocks from the Lush Caves biome, which is not yet available in regular worlds, but you can already get most of these blocks. Let's start with the moss blocks. Moss is a new vegetation block. It can act like dirt and is mined with a hoe. Moss blocks can also be used to craft moss carpet. Moss can also now replace the vines in the crafting recipes for mossy cobble and mossy stone bricks. You can also bone meal moss, that causes it to spread to nearby blocks. When bone meal, moss will spread to stone, granite, andesite, diorite, tuff, deepslate, dirt, coarse dirt, rooted dirt, grass blocks, podzol, mycelium, and cave vines. Those blocks are then replaced by the moss, and on top of them new vegetation can grow. Such a moss patch is up to 6 blocks across and will have some jagged edges. On the top, the vegetation is placed on 60% of all available blocks, and that will be around 52% grass, around 10% tall grass, around 26% moss carpet, around 7% azalea bushes, and around 4% flowering azalea bushes. There are 2 ways in this version to obtain the moss blocks. You can buy them 2 for 1 emerald from a wandering trader, or you can find them in shipwreck supply chests. These are the chests where you can otherwise find food like potatoes or wheat, some leather armor, and coal. For each shipwreck supply chest that you open, you have about a 42% chance of finding moss blocks. Keep in mind that these need to be chests that you've never opened before. Let's talk about azalea bushes, since those are generated on top of that moss. Bees see them as flowers, so they will happily buzz around and get pollen from them, and they act very similar to saplings. Both can be placed in flower pots, and you can also bone meal them to get azalea trees. The trunk of these trees are made out of oak logs in a new kind of bending tree manner, and the leaves are randomly scattered azalea and flowering azalea leaves. About 25% of them will be flowering. Under the trunk, the dirt will also be converted into a rooted dirt block. So let's talk about that rooted dirt block. It's a new type of decorative dirt which will have a broader use once we get to the Lush Caves biome. But for now it works much like another type of dirt. You can bone meal it to get a new type of block hanging underneath. It is called hanging roots. And if you till it, you turn it into regular dirt and a hanging roots block pops out. Hanging root is just a decorative block, and it can also be waterlogged. Let's talk about another new Lush Caves block. It's the cave vine and its glowberries. Cave vines grow down from the ceiling, much like weeping vines in the nether. When they grow, they have a chance of producing glowberries. Glowberries are a natural light source at level 14, as strong as a torch, as well as a food source, so you can eat them. If you use a glowberry on a ceiling, you will plant a new cave vine as well. You can bone meal a cave vine as well. That will not make it grow longer, rather it will make it produce glowberries. Right-clicking again will pick the berries out of the glow vine, just like it does with sweet berry bushes. If you want to make the vine longer yourself without waiting for it to naturally grow, then you can also place another glowberry on the bottom to extend it. Another way to get more glowberries is to have bees pollinate cave vines. Like other vines, you can climb cave vines and they slow you down as you walk through them. To get these, you need to go exploring some mine shafts. You can find glowberries in mineshaft chest minecarts, and you will have about a 39% chance of finding glowberries in each one. Let's move on to another new plant. It's the Dripleaf. The Dripleaf comes in two variants. It's a small and a large Dripleaf. Small Dripleaves is a too tall plant. It needs moisture, so it can only grow on clay, moss, or at least partially underwater. To mine it, you will need to use shears. When placing it back, the facing direction is determined by which direction you are facing. Small Dripleaf can be bone mealed into big Dripleaves, and big Dripleaves grow taller when bone mealed as well. If you stand on a big Dripleaf, then it will tilt and you will fall off. Then the tilted Dripleaf will tilt back up after a while. Big Dripleaves will also tilt when hit by a projectile, and they work with redstone. You can redstone power a big Dripleaf to cause it to not tilt from standing on it only when hit by a projectile. The only way to get these at the moment is to find a wandering trader who is willing to sell you small Dripleaves. You will get 2 for the price of 1 emerald. The last new Lush Caves block is a Spore Blossom. The Spore Blossom is a large flower placed on ceilings with particles dripping from it and filling the air around it. Currently, the Spore Blossom is a creative-only item. It cannot be obtained in survival mode. Let's talk about Glow Lichen. Glow Lichen is a dim light source that generates in caves and spreads light at level 7. Much like vines, you will need to use shears to pick it up, but it has some differences to vines. It does not spread on its own, but you can use bone meal to spread it along block surfaces. Another note is that Glow Lichen can also be waterlogged and can also generate into water. The final major new block in this version is the Candle. Candles are crafted from string and honeycomb, which gives you an undyed candle. This can then be crafted together with any type of dye to create a dyed candle. When you place it, you can place 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the same block. And when you light them, they will emit 3 light levels per candle in the block. That means that you will get more light from more candles, up to light level 12. Candles are waterloggable, but of course they cannot be lit when underwater, and you light them like you would light a fire, for instance by right-clicking with a flint and steel or a fire charge. If you want to put out a candle, you do so by right-clicking them with an empty hand. Candles can be placed on any surface, however they do not require support and will stay even if that block is then subsequently broken. Finally, you can celebrate somebody by putting a candle in their cake. Do this by right-clicking with a candle onto the cake. There's one more block type in this version that we'll go through here, even though it's not available in survival. It is the light block. You can only get this through commands like /give. That means that you need operator level permissions to do so, or cheats enabled in your world. The light block is an invisible, waterloggable block that emits light at a given level. You cannot see them unless you are holding a light block, much like a barrier block. But when you are holding a light block, then you can target them, and right-clicking a light block will cycle its light level. You can then use middle click to get a light block of that light level into your inventory. The icon for the light block also shows which level of light it is. Let's move on to world generation changes. While most of the world generation changes for this update has been delayed until the Holiday Part 2 release, there are some world generation changes and fixes in this version. Let's start with a very long-standing bug, where grass, flowers, snow layers and such would float above a lake or a lava pool. That bug is fixed in this version. Strongholds will now mostly be encased in stone. That means that you will no longer see them sticking out or hovering in mid-air. Mineshaft corridors have also been upgraded. They now get support log pillars below or chains above when they are floating. There will also no longer be any floating cobwebs unsupported in the air. There are also 2 new biomes in this version that are not included in a regular world. They are Dripstone Caves and Lush Caves. You can get these specifically in a world by running a single biome world and selecting Dripstone Caves or Lush Caves. In the Dripstone Caves, there are plenty of pointed dripstone on the floor and ceilings, and some small pools of water, and in some places you'll find larger stalagmites, stalactites, and columns built from dripstone blocks. In the lush caves biome, you will find moss covering the floors and ceilings, spore blossoms growing from the ceilings and dripping particles down, there are clay pools with Dripleaves plants growing out of them, and azalea bushes and flowering azalea bushes around. Finally, there are also cave vines and glowberries growing all over the lush caves. Azalea trees also loves to have roots going down to lush caves. That means that if you find an azalea tree, which can happen either over ground or in another cave, then you can follow its root system down to find the lush caves. Obviously less of a use when your entire world is a lush cave. Let's talk about changes to mobs in this version. A new functionality has been added to shulkers. A shulker hitting another shulker with a shulker bullet can make a new shulker. This is a random chance depending on the amount of other shulkers around. If there are fewer shulkers, there is a higher chance of a new one spawning. However, this is more tricky now because shulkers will no longer target other shulkers. This has to happen when they are targeting another entity. Together with this, a bunch of fixes have been done to shulkers, where shulkers in boats and minecarts now set up properly, and shulkers will now teleport correctly when going through portals. Other mob changes: skeletons will now burn even if in a minecart when they are being exposed to sunlight. Endermen now attack endermites regardless of how the endermite was spawned. That means you can spawn it using a spawn egg or /summon, and endermen will still be mad at it. The wither health bar now properly animates again during its spawn cycle. Llamas will no longer spit at players in peaceful mode. And leads now work with squids, including glow squids. Finally, the loot table of Drowned has changed. Instead of having a chance of dropping a gold ingot, they now have a chance of dropping a copper ingot, and that chance increases with looting. Note that it's still pretty dang rare. Let's move over to gameplay changes. This one is slightly related to mobs still. Infested blocks no longer destroy the instant you poke them. Instead, they have half the destroy time of their non-infested counterpart. That means there's a difference, but you will have to be quick to figure out that a block is infested. Experience orbs will now sometimes merge when in large quantities to improve performance. It doesn't change the rate at which you can absorb them, but it does limit the amount of orbs floating around in the world. Any 2 orbs that merge will gain the lifetime of the most recently created one, which means that you can have orbs floating around for a very long time as long as you keep adding new ones. This should fix a problem where some farms, especially Enderman-based farms, would completely drop performance of the game after a while if left unattended, for instance when used in AFK mode. Another experience-related fix is that when an item with mending was fully repaired, any leftover experience didn't go to repairing other gear, it went directly onto the XP bar, even if there were other items in need of repair. Shulker boxes, and bundles if you have them enabled through the data pack, will now drop their items when you destroy their item form. This does not mean that shulker boxes drop their items when you mine the block, but rather that if you take your shulker box and throw it into a cactus or into lava, then the shulker box will be destroyed but its items will pop out. Food will no longer pop off a campfire when you extinguish that campfire. And speaking of food, you can now eat suspicious stew even when you are at full hunger bar. What's new in composting? New compostable items have been added this version. You have a 30% chance of adding a layer if you add azalea leaves, glowberries, moss carpet, small drip leaves, and hanging roots. This is the same as if you add normal leaves or seeds. 50% chance of adding a layer if you add flowering azalea leaves or glow lichen. This is slightly better, like cactus or sugarcane. 65% chance of adding a layer for spore blossoms, azalea bushes, moss blocks, and big drip leaves. This is the same level as flowers or mushrooms. And 85% for flowering azalea bushes, which is like bread or baked potatoes. We touched on this together with other changes, but cauldrons can now be filled with buckets of lava. And speaking of buckets, there is a fix to a long-standing bug involving a desync. If you were turning quickly when you picked up water or lava with a bucket, then there was a chance that your bucket would desync. That would give you a so-called ghost bucket, where the bucket would look like it had the liquid on your hotbar, but when you try to use it, it would vanish. Grass paths have been renamed to dirt paths and can now be made using a shovel on dirt, podzol, mycelium, coarse dirt, and rooted dirt. Simple firework rockets with 1 gunpowder can now be crafted using the recipe book. The maximum length of item names in the Anvil user interface has been increased from 35 to 50 characters. The last use of an anvil when it breaks will no longer cause the player to violently throw out their item in anger. Any custom player head textures would cause a lag spike when they loaded in, that is fixed in this version. And a bug where arrows fired into the side of bamboo had a chance of never despawning has been fixed. Let's talk about changes to minecarts. All rail types can now be waterlogged, and they work with a dispenser and water bucket too. Flowing water no longer breaks rails, and minecarts can pass through water, although they get slowed down more than usual, of course. A few redstone related changes in this version. When pistons break blocks like leaves, there will now be the regular breaking particles. Cauldrons can now have lava, and if you check those with a comparator, that gives you an output signal strength of 3. And a bug has been fixed with observers that didn't detect when a grass block changed to dirt if that was caused by a tree growing on top. Let's talk about advancements. This version adds 11 new advancements to the game. They are whatever floats your goat, for getting into a boat with a goat. Wax on for using honeycomb to apply wax to any type of copper block. And wax off for scraping that same wax off of any type of copper block. The cutest predator for catching an axolotl in a bucket. The healing power of friendship for teaming up with an axolotl and winning a fight. Glow and behold for making a sign glow. Light as a rabbit for walking on powder snow with leather boots. Surge protector for having a lightning strike a lightning rod near a villager without setting the area on fire. Is it a bird for looking at a parrot through a spyglass? Is it a balloon for looking at a ghast through a spyglass? And is it a plane for looking at a dragon through a spyglass? In addition, some changes to existing advancements. A balanced diet now also requires eating glowberries, and the 2x2 advancement now also requires breeding goats and axolotls, and the parrots and the bats now also triggers when breeding goats and axolotls. Finally, there was a bug where recipes and advancements were not granted if you had the user interface open. You kind of had to close your crafting window for the craft to count. That is fixed in this version. Let's talk about visual changes in this version, and let's start with a bug fix. There was a problem with occlusion culling that meant that sometimes stuff failed to render, especially this was prevalent when looking through cave openings. A whole bunch of textures have been updated in this version that includes blackstone, polished blackstone bricks, cracked polished blackstone bricks, gilded blackstone, snow-covered grass sides, carved pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, the top texture of smokers, the sugarcane item texture, and the jungle door item textures. As mentioned previously, the textures of the different ore variants have also changed. There are also new icons for clocks and compasses. Smooth lighting now works properly underwater, and the sky color now varies smoothly when moving between different biomes. Spectators can now see through lava and also through the new powder snow. And the end portal now has a bottom texture. Let's talk about some changes specifically for creative mode. The Redstone tab has been reordered to prioritize highly used blocks. The Redstone items are now in groups of the following. First, the essentials, then unique activators, then some miscellaneous unique blocks, then common activators, and finally openables. Ores and stone types have also been reordered in the creative inventory, and of course there are new spawn eggs for axolotls, glow squids, and goats. Let's talk about the rest of the user interface too. Buttons in the user interface that change value, like the difficulty button, can now be controlled with the mouse wheel so you can scroll through all the options. These type of buttons can also be clicked when holding the shift key to move backwards instead of forwards in the cycle. There's a new harsher world downgrade warning with the title in red, stating that world downgrades are not supported. And if your chat is disabled, then there are now improved error messages telling you why you cannot chat. The Mojang Studios loading screen now has an alternative background. It is a solid black background that you can toggle on with the monochrome logo accessibility option. And speaking of accessibility options, the user interface narration now includes more information. It includes the position and usage of the hovered or focused elements, and frankly, sometimes a staggering amount of information about what is going on.
Options. Video settings. Graphics, fancy button. Screen element 1 out of 2. Selection list element 3 out of 11. Selected list entry element 1 out of 2. Press tab to navigate to next element. Left click to switch to graphics. Fabulous.
Of course, as usual, the main menu background has been updated to a new panorama. There are two new languages in this version. They are Hong Kong Chinese and pre-reform Russian. There are some new fixes for the statistics. There's a new statistics for time with the world open that also includes time when the game was paused. And a bug has been fixed where the statistics screen sometimes didn't show up-to-date information, especially when opened several times in a row. Credits have also been updated, and there are new functions for the credits screen. If you hold down space, that increases the scroll speed of the credits, and holding down control will increase it even more. In fact, if you hold down both control keys, then you will go at hyper speed. Splash text changes in this version. There used to be a splash text that said "Now on OpenGL 2.1", that has been replaced with "Now on OpenGL 3.2 Core Profile". There used to be one saying "Now Java 8", that has been replaced by "Now Java 16". One splash text has been removed entirely, it is "woo/v/", and there are a whole bunch of new splashes. They are: this splash text has been delayed until part 2. Contains simulated goats. Homemade. There's less than a cat on, my keyboard, tilde. The cutest predator you'll ever meet. Now you're thinking with pistons. Get to the copper! Board game version also available. Honey, I waxed the copper. Plant-based light sources. And made by, quote, real people. Let's wrap up this marathon video with the sound changes in this version. Let's start with goats. They have sounds for idling, walking around, jumping, eating, ramming, hurting, and dying. The screaming goats also have unique variations of sounds. Of course, for idling, for being milked, for ramming, hurting, and dying. Sounds for axolotls, they have an idle chirp sound. A different idle sound when on land. A splash sound. An attacking sound. A hurting sound. And a dying sound. And a sound for scooping them up in a bucket. Glow squids have ambient sounds. Shooting ink. For hurting. And for dying. There are also new sounds related to the ink, for using an ink sac or glowing sac. And a new sound for using dye. New block sounds in this version as well. Let's start with Amethysts, sounds for breaking them. And placing them. And walking on them. Amethyst crystal sounds for breaking them. And placing them. Sounds for Deepslate, for breaking it, placing it, and walking on it. Sounds for Deepslate bricks. And for stepping on it. Sounds for breaking calcite, placing it, and walking on it. Sounds for breaking and placing tuff. And for walking on it. Sounds for copper, for breaking and placing it. And for walking on it. A new sound for waxing it. For unwaxing it with an axe. And for scraping away oxidization with an axe. Spyglass has sounds for when you start using it and when you fold it back together. There's a new sound for powder snow, for walking on it, and for breaking it. There's also a new sound for picking it up with a bucket, and for placing it with a bucket. There's sounds for taking freezing damage, and for snow putting out fire. There's also a unique sound for a skeleton converting to a stray. There are new sounds for dripstone blocks for placing and breaking them, and for walking on them. Pointed dripstone has a sound for when it crashes down. There's sounds for water dripping from dripstone. For water filling a cauldron when dripping from dripstone. For lava dripping from dripstone. For lava filling a cauldron when dripping from dripstone. New sounds for Azalea for placing and breaking them, and for walking on them. And new sounds for Azalea leaves for placing and breaking them, and for walking on them. Sounds for big Dripleaves, placing and breaking them, stepping on them, the Dripleaves tilting down, and tilting back up. New sounds for cave vines for placing and breaking them. The new sounds for hanging roots. There are new sounds for placing and breaking moss. And for walking on moss. There's new sounds for placing or breaking rooted dirt. And for walking on it. The Spore Blossom has a placing and breaking sound. And there are new sounds for vines. The candles have ambient sounds. Sounds for placing and breaking them. An extinguishing sound. And a sound for walking on top of candles. There's also a sound for squishing a candle onto a cake. In addition, there are also new sounds for using bone meal, and a new sound for riding a minecart underwater. And that brings us to the end of a very long sequence of new things. But that isn't all. There are a ton of smaller bug fixes that have been done for this version, and those are all included in my long snapshot update series leading into this update. So if you want every tiny little detail, please go and have a look at those. There will also be several more videos for this update. We'll have a specific video for all the changes that apply when using the Caves and Cliffs preview data pack. There will also be a video for all the technical changes in this version, including changes to commands, a new marker entity, changes to the advancement system, resource packs, and so on. And a special video just dedicated to changes in the custom world generation formats, because there's quite a lot of those. Anyway, this was long enough. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video, I do appreciate it. If you liked the video, please consider helping me out in return and clicking the like button or dropping a comment down below. If you share the video with a friend, that will also help it out greatly. If you want to stay on top of this type of changes in the future, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make update videos for every single new snapshot, pre-release, release candidate, and full release of Minecraft Java Edition, as well as many more things. But that's gonna do it for this time. Thank you for watching, my name is slicedlime, and I will see you next time.